So last night, our speaker, Mike Phillips, we gave him our Elizabeth Pepka Environmental Achievement Award for their lifelong achievement. He doesn't clap, but that's thank you. And I had lunch with Mike, and he said to me, "I don't like awards, Chris. I just don't like them." So I said, "Well, quit doing Kia stuff." Anyway, Mike has served as the executive director of the Turner Endangered Species Fund, advisor to the Turner Biodiversity Division since he co-founded both of them with Ted Turner in 1997. Since the inception, both efforts have stood as the most significant private effort in the world to address the extinction crisis through reintroduction projects on behalf of imperiled species. Prior to working with Turner, Mike worked with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and National Park Service. In 1981, he served as the leader of historic efforts to restore red wolves in southeastern United States, gray wolves in Yellowstone. He's worked in the oil and gas industry, studying grizzly bears, black bears in North Carolina. And he was also a politician from 2006 to 2020. He was in the state Senate and the state Congress of Montana. He's authored hundreds of papers, 2 books. He has a lot of degrees from a lot of different schools. I think that's not as interesting is the fact that this guy is a doer, an action person who gets things done. And that's what we really appreciate. But before you get up here, and he also was the person who started and led, and I'm assuming if some of you are here, you may have voted for it, but the first state-run human ballot initiative to reintroduce wolves back into this state. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Mike Phillips. It's still a little tight. Good.
That's okay. We can make the mic work. I couldn't hear Chris well. Can y'all hear me? That's good. Well, it is an honor for me to be here tonight, standing in front of the vision of the Nitsa family and to celebrate the great work of ACES. What a wonderful mission, bringing people together to educate, to advance environmental responsibility. It's a great honor for me. Your presence tonight is appreciated. It's a gift to me. I appreciate that you're spending some of your good time with me. I'd be talking to an empty room if it weren't for y'all. Now, when you look at the title, you might think that I'm intending a sobering night. The extinction crisis, on the one hand, is not really a light topic, but what I intend to offer encouragement that we together as a collective of determined and committed individuals, there is a direct way to end and reverse the extinction crisis. And that's what I hope you take away from tonight. I want to start, however, by sharing an observation that was presented 44 years ago. An observation that prompted me to shift my professional perspective in a manner that led to a focus on collective endeavors. The observation, Mike Phillips is an asshole. That's not Mike Phillips is an asshole. Or so was observed on the wall of the men's room at a bar in Ely, Minnesota in the winter of 1980. I can still see it, y'all. I can still see it. Scratched among the other pearls of wisdom, things like gas, grass, or ass, nobody rides for free. And there it was, in big, bold, black letters for all to see, Mike Phillips is an asshole. Now, 2 things made that observation cut like a razor. First, it had been written by a teammate of mine on the Wolf study crew. I recognized the handwriting from our captured data sheets. Right? I knew exactly what it was. And, oh boy, it was true. It's true. At that point in my young career, I was so excited about the prospect of working with wild things in a wild place that I was like the animated, smart kid that sat in the front of class and had an answer to every question that was asked. Being around me had to be exhausting. I left the bar that night determined to do two things. I was determined to renew my ability to control my enthusiasm so as to not wear teammates out. I knew better. I had learned long before from playing ball the value of warm relations with teammates. I knew the value from playing ball of the value of bringing people together for a collective good. I left the bar that night also determined to find teammates who are equally committed to the cause of wildlife conservation. I have been blessed with great teammates ever since. A team is a collective endeavor. I've been blessed with great teammates. I am here before you tonight because of that. So I want to ask, have you ever heard of Whipple's monkey flower, white-line top minnow, Las Vegas dace, sugar spoon, Tennessee wiffle shell? These are all species that have gone extinct in the recent past. Along the long sweep of time that Mother Earth has supported multicellular life, there have been 5 great extinction crises before historical time. The 5th occurred about 65 million years ago when a meteor struck the planet and in a geologic instant ended the reign of dinosaurs. Every year, thousands of species fine-tuned by time and place disappear at the hand of mankind. The losses are so severe that the certainty and redundancy of nature is being stripped away, exhausting the lives of millions of creatures great and small, to say nothing of humans. While some environmental problems can be corrected, such is not the case for an extinction. Once a species vanishes, another heaven and earth, an unimaginable amount of time and a great deal of luck must come together for that species to rise again. There is no workaround for extinction. And the loss of a species brings forth yet another sinister consequence, the loss of ecological interactions and the potential for evolution to fine-tune relationships that promote ecological diversity and integrity. The forces that drive an extinction crisis are so powerful and pervasive that the normal Darwinian-based rules of survival of the fittest no longer apply. Species that survive an extinction crisis aren't so much adapted as simply lucky. The current extinction crisis is on par with the 5 great waves of loss that have swept across this planet over the last 500 million years. The onset of the Anthropocene, the age of man, marked the beginning of this crisis, at least in the late 18th century, if not much, much earlier. Given that and given the gravity of the crisis, it should matter no matter who you are. Let's assume for a moment that you're a person of faith. How can you stand by and watch creation destroyed for no good reason without rising in defense? Well, let's assume the alternative. Let's assume that you're a secular humanist. And you believe that rather than faith, it's data, logic, empiricism that matter most. Well, the extinction crisis makes clear that the health of local landscapes the world over upon which we depend are not the least bit healthy. No matter who you are, the extinction crisis should matter. It stands as one of humanity's most pressing and least attended problems, and really demands that we abandon a relationship with Mother Earth based on disregard and destruction in favor of a relationship based on regard and restoration. To that end, I have been blessed to be involved with a large number of endangered species restoration projects, all that aim to redress the extinction crisis. All of these projects have been undergirded by the Endangered Species Act. That simple fact makes the law relevant to us tonight but it's also relevant to us tonight because the law is an obvious consequence of our ability to work as a collective. The Endangered Species Act passed Congress with nearly unanimous consent and was signed into law by President Nixon in December of 1973. It has been heralded as a great environmental law. It's been attacked as governmental overreach that pits the needs of people against the needs of non-human life. Regardless of where you fall on the spectrum of celebration or condemnation of the Endangered Species Act, we can all agree the law is consequential. My first brush with the Endangered Species Act involved a study of grizzly bears in northeastern Alaska in anticipation of oil and gas development in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. My job was to watch grizzly bears and determine what did they do and where did they do it to the nearest minute. So I would watch bears for extended periods. I would follow bears for extended periods, all really demanded by the law. I was also intimately involved with the Endangered Species Act as I was part of a wolf study in Minnesota. That's when, I don't know why the thing keeps flicking on and off. Why did it keep flicking on and off? You don't know why it flicks on and off. All right. That's when I was observed being an asshole right here in Minnesota, doing gray wolf work in northeastern Minnesota with Superior National Forest, all guided by the Endangered Species Act. And then, of course, I was honored to lead the Red Wolf Restoration Project. This is just, now it's back on, the Red Wolf. All of these projects influenced me early, back in the 1980s, all guided by the Endangered Species Act. I've been blessed to do a lot of wolf work. 3 wolves in particular are important tonight. Again, all this work undergirded by the law. That wolf up in the corner, that's a big male red wolf known as 140. That's my bootlace around his muzzle. We had forgot a muzzle, so I had to tie my boots about to come off because I used my bootlace to tie him up. That was Super Bowl Sunday, probably 1987. He had wandered onto private land and had to be retrieved. Hold that thought, 140 matters. And then this little wolf right here, we remembered the muzzle with her, the blue muzzle, in the candy cane striped radio collar just helped it be seen at night. It's reflected tape. This was a little wolf known as 344. That's me with the hat on and my teammate. 344 was the first red wolf born in the wild in many, many decades. As it came to be, she spent most of her time on private land. And then this wolf was instructed as well. That's Doug Smith with me and me there. That's a young black wolf known as number 3. As we carried number 3 out of the Rose Creek Pen on the northern border of the park, we were moving him to the central part of Yellowstone to let him go. He had traveled north of the park, even in the great public wildlands of the western United States. It became apparent that private land really mattered. 140 and 344, those 2 red wolves made extensive use of private land. Number 3 made extensive use of private land. This became important as I met Ted Turner. Ted, can y'all see that picture? I know it's not. Ted and I were intrigued by this relationship between private land and endangered species. And after courting for about 18 months, he found sufficient common ground to give rise to the Turner Endangered Species Fund and Turner Biodiversity Divisions. They aim to use reintroductions to restore populations of imperiled species. They're based on collaborations in the principles of conservation biology. We focus on carnivores, plant pollinator complexes, species with historic ranges that include Ted's properties, and dissemination of credible scientific and policy information about biodiversity conservation. We've been involved in a lot of reintroductions, 27 reintroductions specifically that aim to benefit 15 different imperiled species, plants, birds, fishes, mammals, amphibians, reptiles, and 1 invertebrate. We've worked all over the country. This is a picture of Ted's Flying Bee Ranch outside Bozeman, Montana. But he's got property in the northern Rocky Mountains of southwestern U.S., the Great Plains of the United States, and the Southeast. We work all over as we try to push back on the extinction crisis. Beyond running our own reintroduction projects, we've been actively involved as members of federal recovery programs. For example, we built and maintained for many, many years a black-footed ferret captive breeding and pre-release facility, producing ferrets in dirt captivity, but living in the dirt, so that when they were released, they were a little better suited to life in the wild than they would have been otherwise. Dozens and dozens of black-footed ferrets came to our facility before being reintroduced by the United States Fish and Wildlife Service to advance recovery of the rarest carnivore in the world, that being the black-footed ferret. We have maintained since 1998 a captive breeding and pre-release facility for Mexican wolves at Ted's Ladder Ranch in southwestern New Mexico. Well over 100 wolves have resided at our facility in New Mexico. Dozens and dozens of animals have left our facility for life in the wild. And finally, perhaps our coup de grace, if you will, as Chris mentioned, we were the driving force from 1995 until 2020. We were the driving force to bring forth the first effort ever to use direct democracy to secure a mandate to restore an endangered species. When we began this work, no one knew that it could be done this way. Well, when you look at the long history of endangered species recovery programs, it's always a governmental affair, principally done by the federal government or done by a state government. Given the technical expertise that is required and the legal authorities that are required, it's hard to imagine any other way. Ted and I did. We imagined that we could assemble the expertise, we could assemble the legal authority, that we could go forth with private efforts that would rival anything a governmental agency would do. This, of course, is the Yellowstone Project. Secretary of Interior Bruce Babbitt, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Director Molly Beatty. This is the first wolf going into the Crystal Creek Pen in the winter of 1995, a governmental affair. We saw a different way. And a great deal of the credit goes to Ted. He's been a great boss and a great friend for a long time, from being a hard-charging businessman and diplomat who founded the Goodwill Games. Many of you in this room may not know all of these things about Ted Turner. Founded the Goodwill Games at the height of the Cold War, based on his belief that athletic competition can bring people together. To the prescient newsman who understood that the currency of freedom and democracy is good information. That led, of course, to the founding of CNN. To the earth-centric philanthropist who has donated over $2 billion and his heart and his soul to groups like the Nuclear Threat Initiative, the United Nations Foundation, the Captain Planet Foundation, the Turner Foundation, the Turner Endangered Species Fund, the Turner Biodiversity Divisions. At his core, Ted is an outdoor guy. He quietly assembled on purpose the largest assemblage of private wildlands in the world, over 2 million acres scattered across a dizzying array of ecological settings. Of all the people that have ever lived, and sapiens go back 200,000 years anyway, maybe 3. Of all of us who've ever lived, and that's about 80 billion of us, about 80 billion of us that came and went, of all of them, no one has done more for humanity with a focus on the environment than Ted Turner, richly deserving of the Nobel Peace Prize. What we intended to do had never been done. We succeeded because of Ted's unwavering commitment to wild places and wild things. the last substantive conversation I may have with Ted, and he has made known his Lewy body dementia diagnosis. So I'm not speaking out of turn. The last substantive conversation, when I see Ted now, and I don't see him often, it's always, Ted, it's Mike, it's good to see you. I always introduce myself out of fear that he would say, I know who that is, but I don't know who that is. Hey, Ted, it's Mike, it's good to see you. The last substantive conversation I had with Ted, it was in January of 2020, right before the pandemic. Team Turner was in Denver at a big meeting. And as is our habit, we all went to dinner that night. 30 or 40 of us to one of Ted's restaurants. As is my habit, when I'm out with Ted, I don't hang out with Ted. If I'm right near Ted, I end up with more work than I can get done. So I'm way over there. So he's at the family table. I'm way at the other side of the restaurant. Chip, you filming this? Yeah, well, I have to defend this to Ted. Anyway, I'm sitting at my table, and Ted says, Mike. We'll call him Ted, Mike. I ignored him. I had my back to him. I ignored him. I said, I can always say, I'm sorry, Ted, I didn't hear you. I ignored him. I didn't want to get up and call for family table. About a minute later, his granddaughter came up and tapped me on the shoulder, and she said, Grandpa wants to talk to you. Well, I couldn't deny that. Let's not get up. Now I go over to Ted's table, and it had been a long day. And for these meetings, Ted is engaged from A to Z, man. He doesn't get up and leave. He's right there all day long, paying attention. And so he looks up at me, and he's not well, and he's tired. His eyes are weepy. And he says quite simply, Mike, we did okay, didn't we? I said, Ted, we did exactly what we set out to do. He did great. We have been, from nearly day one, the most important private effort in the world to use reintroductions to restore populations of imperiled species as redress for the extinction crisis. We did what we set out to do. And at this point, there's a tear coming down his cheek. And he looks at me and he says, and the wolves are okay. I said, Ted, the wolves are doing good. And he gives me a high five. That may be the last substantive conversation I have with my dear friend Ted Turner. We've been doing this a long time. We've been doing it long enough to have failures. You learn a lot from failures, so I'm going to touch on some failures. We failed with the Oplomono falcon. We attempted to restore the Oplomono falcon, not a big bird, a bird that lives a lot on insects. He's not a big, powerful falcon, dynamic flyer. Small birds and crickets and insects are the diet of the Oplomono falcon. We let a lot of birds go in the northern Chihuahuan grasslands of New Mexico, and they simply disappeared. It appeared as though drought had reduced prey biomass so much that there wasn't enough food. We failed with the black-footed ferret on the short grass prairie of northeastern New Mexico. Again, it appears as though it was a drought-driven failure. There simply wasn't enough production of prairie dogs to support a black-footed ferret. The black-footed ferret is an ecological specialist of the finest kind. It's a fossorial mammal. Y'all know what a fossorial mammal is? A fossorial mammal lives in the underground nearly all the time. That little guy up there could not dig a hole to save his life. And yet he lives in a hole all the time. He is an obligate carnivore on prairie dogs. That's the only place you'll ever find a black-footed ferret is a prairie dog colony. Because of drought, we couldn't keep the colonies going, and so we failed with the black-footed ferret in northeastern New Mexico. We failed with the Mexican wolf in this country. I am blessed to have served on every Mexican wolf recovery team convened since 1995. The recovery plan is a joke. It will not work. We failed. I put that failure squarely at the feet of the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. They're dear friends of mine. They know where I stand on this issue, so I'm not speaking out of turn. And we failed. We failed with the swift fox in the grasslands of South Dakota. In part, and we've been around long enough to suffer death. Our project leader, a delightful young man named Kevin Harness, died tragically in a boating accident. And sometimes some people simply can't be replaced. Our failures taught us a lot. We've had a great deal more successes. in part because we're not bothered by failure. Like you just keep keeping on. I think this is a wonderful sentiment. Celebrate the struggle. We've had a lot of successes. We're building a massively important program on behalf of the gopher tortoise in northwestern Florida. Not only is this species an ecological engineer, a highly interactive species, a keystone species, because it provides so much habitat for so many other species because they build impressive burrows. But the state of Florida has built a program that has created a marketplace for gopher tortoises, such that a landowner like Ted can do good, giving gopher tortoises a home and get paid very good money for doing it. It's a nice blend of conservation and commerce. We have put in place the most successful effort restoring the imperiled red-cockaded woodpecker ever. It's a fantastic project that was historic since it started in a forest that had never before supported the birds. Now, why does that matter? The red-cockaded woodpecker, you can see the shadow and then you see the bird. He's going into his cavity. Red-cockaded woodpecker is the only woodpecker in the world that will build a cavity in a live tree. The live tree is important because that cavity, the tree will respond to the hole by producing sap that flows down from the hole that provides some protection from predators, snakes, for example. They are deeply committed to their cavities. They go in the same cavity every night. If they can't get in their cavity, they won't make it a night or two in the woods. So we let them all go in a forest that was well within historic range, but the original trees had been cut down. The birds had left 100 years ago. New trees grew up. Birds never came back. When we began, we had to provide all the holes in the form of artificial inserts. No one had ever done it at the scale that we did it with the red-cockaded woodpecker, a very difficult species to work with because it is a habitat specialist. Tremendous success with those two species. We've had great success with the black-footed ferret. Now, you might say, gee, as Micah said, you just failed. That's true, we did on the short-grass prairie. But elsewhere in New Mexico, on the 3rd of November, 2008, we recorded the first black-footed ferret born in the wild in New Mexico in over, probably 7 decades at another site at the Bermejo Park Ranch that is not short-grass prairie. We've had good success with black-footed ferrets. We are very good at restoring the prairie dog, which is essential for the black-footed ferret. We translocated over 15,000 prairie dogs to create habitat for the black-footed ferret. We are now actively involved in building a program that should lift the big burden off the black-footed ferret's back, and that is sylvatic plague. Plague is what is really the hindrance to recovering the ferret, and the prairie dog were developing a system for managing plague, preventing plague in the field at scale. A tremendous bit of work on behalf of the rarest carnivore in the world. We've had tremendous success with the gray wolf, both in the northern Rocky Mountains. The Flying D Ranch has supported the bear trap pack for 20 plus years, one of the largest packs in North America, on average 16 strong at the end of each year. We're actively involved, as I said, in the Mexican wolf recovery program, even though I believe the recovery plan won't work. We're actively involved. Ted was deeply committed to restoration of American plains bison, which by all accounts should be listed under the Endangered Species Act, but it's not. And what you guys should know about the American plains bison at its heyday, 30, 40, 50 million strong. The American plains bison represented the greatest assemblage of mammalian biomass the world had ever produced. Across 500 million years, the planet has supported multicellular life. The greatest assemblage of mammals is the American plains bison in a few short decades. We took this most abundant species and drove it to the precipice of extinction. Ted has done a beautiful job bringing the American plains bison back from that edge. We have the nation's most successful effort on behalf of cutthroat trout. In the northern Rocky Mountains, it's the West Slope cutthroat trout. In New Mexico, it's Rio Grande cutthroat trout. When we finish the work in the next few years, we will have restored native cutthroat trout to 250 miles of streams and springs. That's a scale of work that the federal or state government has a hard time achieving. A tremendous success on behalf of these cold water fish. We have registered the most successful effort ever on behalf of the endangered desert bighorn sheep. If you look in that picture, there's one, there's two, there's three, there's four, there's five different bighorn rams that we're releasing at the Thaw Cristobal Mountains at the Almendares Ranch in New Mexico. This work led the state of New Mexico to remove bighorn sheep from the state list of endangered and threatened species. Because of the success at the Thaw Cristobal Mountains, we were able to donate. This is a ewe, if you can see her, in the red bag being carted off by helicopters. That's an adult, reproductively active bighorn sheep. She's going elsewhere to advanced recovery elsewhere in the state of New Mexico. This was the first time that our restoration work had resulted in a donor population. A population of the species in question that was big enough and vigorous enough to donate animals to range-wide recovery. For us, creating donor populations is a gold standard of success. That was in 2011. The program continues on a certain path going forward. We've actually had good luck with the Mexican wolf, like the ferret. I said we failed, but we haven't failed completely. We've been actively involved in the release of Mexican wolves in Mexico. We can celebrate the work being done in Mexico, and we've helped as much as we can. That's a success that we can export our expertise to a foreign country. We've had a very successful captive breeding and pre-release facility, as I said earlier, at the Ladder Ranch, all building to a simple idea. Not only recovering the Mexican wolf, but we also wanted Mexican wolves to be released on the Ladder Ranch. The way this program is built, a landowner has to say to the feds, oh, gee whiz, leave them alone. I don't mind the wolves. Well, we took that a step further. We said, no, not only do we not mind them, we want them. And it was the first time in history, as part of a wolf recovery program, that animals had been specifically released on private land to advance recovery. It was this litter of puppies, and their parents released, if memory serves, in 2021, I think, or 2022. This is a photograph that captures the wildness of the Ladder in the southwestern part of the state. You can see in that picture black bear tracks, adult Mexican wolf tracks, and right in the middle, puppy tracks. That was a big deal for us. We have had a tremendous success with the Bolson tortoise. The Bolson tortoise, known in Spanish as Tortuga Grande. The Bolson is big. Our oldest animal is Gertie. Gertie's got to be 70. Long story how we ended up with Gertie. But if you had Gertie in your hands, you're going to know her. She's big. She's big. She weighs 30, 40 pounds, still reproductively active. The Bolson tortoise was not known to science before the late 1950s. We're the only game in town. You can only find the Bolson tortoise at the Bolson de Mapami, a UN biosphere reserve in central Mexico that supports an unknown and population that surely has an uncertain future. Absent our work, there would be no Bolson tortoise recovery program. We ended up with adults, 26 to be specific, in 2006. And by perfecting husbandry techniques, we now have over 600 hatchlings ready to be released to the wild. We've released already over 100 animals to the wild to recover populations that count. Our work prompted the federal government to stand up an official federal recovery program for the Bolson tortoise. And the Bolson tortoise program introduced us to this guy. That little bitty guy who's about that big. He's known as 09DW1. Now that name is specific and it means a lot. 09 stands for 2009. DW stands for deep well. That's where we found him in 2009. And number one stands for number one. 09 DW1 is the first bolson tortoise born in the United States in over 15,000 years. This is a species that is a relic from the Pleistocene. It was driven to extinction in this country thousands of years ago, almost surely by overexploitation by native peoples. And now you can only find it, absent our work, at the Bolson de Mapami. That was 09 DW1 in 2009. This is 09 DW1 in 2020. As an 11-year-old. That's a face only a mother could love. 09 DW1, that's the Bolson tortoise. Fantastic project underway. Beyond all of this field work, we challenge ourselves to make intellectual contributions too. And of all of the publications that we've assembled, this is probably the most important, and it relates to the Bolson. This is one of our hatchlings. This is the paper, and it simply says, to paraphrase, because of climate change, the ecological deck is being reshuffled, rendering the concept of the historic range for many species rather irrelevant. Sometimes to have a restoration compass, you need to look to a different time, not just historical time. Sometimes you need to look to deep time. The Bolson tortoise occupied the southwestern United States during the Pleistocene. This paper says we need to be more imaginative than simply answering an important question, that being restored to what? Most folks say, well, gee whiz, Mike, we should restore historical conditions. To that I say, well, that's a pretty good answer. That works a lot of time, but sometimes it's not enough. Sometimes your compass for restoration needs to be guided differently. Sometimes it needs to be guided by deep time. Now, I've been an active conservation professional restoration biologist for 43 years. I've learned many things, but nothing is more important tonight than to point out that the future for many imperiled species, the vast majority of imperiled species, the future is simply a choice on our part. Our past, as I said, of disregard and destruction doesn't have to be the future. We could choose a future of regard and restoration. But how do you do that? How do you make that choice? We're all busy. We all only get 24 hours in a day, and a limited number of those, and I promise you it's later than you think. So you got to accept the fact that the clock is ticking. You haven't got much time. It's a big problem, it being the extinction crisis. So any solution has to operate at scale. There's three things, in my estimation, that bring people together at scale to have consequence. Three things. Religion. Religion brings people together to operate at scale. Folks go to church every Sunday morning. Religion brings people together. The marketplace brings people together. The world over, with so few exceptions as to not matter, everybody buys what they need. Food, cover, water, space. You all need it. I need it. Food, cover, water, space. We buy it. The marketplace is a great collector of people, and the consequences operate at scale. The third endeavor, politics. Politics is an endeavor that brings us together to create consequences that work at scale. Most specifically, electoral politics. You've heard recently, I'm sure, elections matter. I was blessed to serve in the Montana State Legislature for 14 years. 6 years in the Montana House when this picture was taken, and 8 years in the Montana State Senate. I learned a lot by serving in elected office. I was reminded of the great power of the collective, of bringing people together to improve things. I also learned a lot about how to run campaigns. And this was essential for work that was yet to come. I learned a lot about campaigns. I knocked on a lot of doors. That's my yard sign. That's a pretty good looking yard sign, don't you think? Red, white, and blue, right? I exploited my personal interest. I'd make sure people knew I fished, right? I knocked on doors and I visited with neighbors. I even exploited my children. Annabelle was really good at getting votes, right? I exploited my children. I learned a lot about campaigning. And this led to this idea, because it wasn't going to happen otherwise. After about 20 years of effort, I said, holy mackerel, maybe there's a way that we can use direct democracy in Colorado, being enacted by the people of the state of Colorado. Very quietly in 2013, 2014, I started pushing this idea at the state level, building a campaign that would allow Coloradans to decide the future of the gray wolf in its great state. So how did we start? We started by telling the truth in a compelling manner. So I've got some short videos. Hang on, here we go.
There's a chorus we sing here in this place, Colorado. It rings from the maroon bells to Mile High, from the great sand dunes to the highest town in America. In the birthplace of rodeo and the cheeseburger, where snowmelt flows into every glass, we hear it floating on the breeze above red rocks or drifting way out into the backcountry where the wild things roam and the air hums with life. It's our anthem to freedom. But listen carefully. One voice has gone missing. A note that rang through our mountains for eons has disappeared. Help us return this voice to Colorado.
Everyone loves a good story. One of our favorite characters is the big bad wolf. But what if our fairy tales don't get it right? Think of a mother wolf. She's not interested in huffing and puffing and blowing your house down. She needs to find her own home. If her pack comes across Little Red Riding Hood in the woods, she'd make sure that her family keeps their distance and avoids conflict. Her life is full of hardship. Less than 10% of hunts are successful. Life expectancies are low. Our stories created a monster. These myths drove us to fear the wolf. By the 1950s, a population of almost 500,000 in the lower 48 was nearly exterminated, and more was lost than just the wolf. You can't pull a character without changing the whole plot. Remove wolves, and herd numbers can explode, rivers can erode. How wrong our narrative has been. In 1973, on the brink of extinction, wolves were one of the first animals to gain protection under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. We'd begun to understand the truth. Wolves don't attack. They avoid us. Cattle are many times more likely to be killed by bad weather than by wolves. The wolf is making a comeback. They're tracing the shores of the Great Lakes, climbing the northern Rockies, roaming the Southwest, but there's a missing link. the reintroduction of wolves to Colorado would restore the natural balance. It's time for a new chapter.
No, those are both award-winning pieces by Grizzly Creek Films out of both Montana. Beautiful shop. That led, so we're telling the truth in an artistic way. That led to the Rocky Mountain Wolf Project, which is a 501c3 organization that aimed to educate. We operate on the belief that if you give good people good information, they'll make good decisions. That led logically then to the Rocky Mountain Wolf Action Fund. Whereas the project was an educational outfit, the fund was a lean, mean, fighting political machine. Got to win a statewide campaign in Colorado. That's all the fund aimed to do. And so off we went, winning a statewide campaign. And fundamentally what Proposition 114, which might ring a bell for some of you folks, it fundamentally said, being enacted, that the commission shall restore wolves. That's paraphrasing, but that's fundamentally what it said. Off we went to make sure that campaign was successful. The first step in Colorado, you have to firm the proposition so the Secretary of State is convinced that Coloradans want to see it on the ballot. In this particular case, we had to collect 124,632 signatures from Coloradans for the Secretary to put the proposition on the ballot. We collected 215,370. We blew right past 124 and change. We had an opportunity, absent the pandemic, we would have run a bill in 2020 that would have set aside the need for the ballot measure. As it turns out, by the time we were ready to introduce Senate Bill 121, which was a consequence of legislators seeing that big number 215, they said, holy mackerel, Coloradans are on this. We should get involved. They were going to introduce a bill 121 right before it was introduced. And it said fundamentally the same thing the proposition said. So we supported 121. The pandemic settled in and the General Assembly terminated the work. This bill never saw the light of day, so we had to run a controversial, contentious, expensive statewide campaign, which we did. Those are all the petitions that were delivered to the Secretary's office. And it was a digital campaign principally because, of course, as you'll recall, during the pandemic, ain't nobody knocking on doors, right? We're all staying home away from one another. So we had commercials that were presented principally across digital platforms. These are two quick commercials so you can see how we framed this. They run, I think, 20, 30 seconds apiece.
Isn't it time we rely on science? This year, we have the chance to restore the natural balance to Colorado by taking politicians out of the picture and directing Colorado Parks and Wildlife to develop a science-based plan that safely reintroduces around 40 wolves across our 17 million acres of public lands. We can restore that critical missing howl to our ecosystems. Isn't that a sensible plan? Vote yes on 114.
Restoring wolves in Colorado is a basic value of Colorado heritage. I mean, wolves have always been here. It's natural to this ecosystem. And by restoring wolves to Colorado in a managed way, a conscious way, we can do it in a way that's intelligent, that's going to benefit the wolves and people.
All of that language poll tested, all very carefully assembled. We ran a top shelf statewide campaign and won. 3,123,612 Coloradans voted. 50.9% said yes, 49.1% said no. It's a thin win, admittedly, but a thin win is a win. There's lots of reasons why this win was so small. We can talk about it later, but nonetheless, a win's a win. Never before in this country had direct democracy been used to secure a mandate to use reintroductions to restore a population of an endangered species. That is electoral politics of the finest kind. As you may recall, Reintroductions have begun. The first animals were released in December of 2023. The first puppies were born in the spring of 2024. More reintroductions will take place. If 40 to 50 more wolves can be reintroduced in Colorado by March of 2026, it is a guarantee that you will have a population of 100 wolves and growing by 2035, 2037, maybe 2040, growing in the direction of viability, which for a wolf population mean about 250 animals or more by 2045 or 2050. Such success in Colorado will ensure the restoration of an archstone population, a population that connects gray wolves from the high Arctic to the Mexican border. There is no other place in the world where you can imagine the restoration of a much maligned, misunderstood, endangered large carnivore across a continent. That is restoration magic of the finest kind. All of this tells me that if we can win enough elections, if we can elect people that believe in wild places and wild things, we can arrest the extinction crisis. We can begin to live with Mother Earth rather than on her. Many years ago, with family and friends, I was blessed to camp on Peel Island. Peel is a magical dot of solitude in the southern arm of Yellowstone Lake. It's not available to the public. We were there, compliments of Doug Smith, who was still employed by the park at the time. The first day out on Peel, as the sun gave way to a rising moon, we heard the hopeful howl of a lone wolf, probably searching for a pal. Wolves don't like being alone. It's hard to be a wolf. It's especially hard to be a wolf if you're on your own. The wolf howled all night. She was nothing if not determined. And because I don't know the gender, I get to choose. It was a she. She was determined. She howled all night long. I thought about getting out of my sleeping bag and howling back. I've howled a lot of gray wolves in my time. But that would have violated park policy, and Doug deserved better of me than that. So I stayed in my sleeping bag, and I listened, and I wondered. And I began to wonder if Mother Earth has been howling to us, hoping for us to respond by setting aside disregard and destruction and embracing regard and restoration. Now, as I wondered, I recalled two questions compelled by Congressman John Lewis, the late, great John Lewis, as he empowered people to embrace the rights of people of color. Two simple questions that Congressman Lewis posed that have direct bearing to any effort to arrest the extinction crisis. Two simple questions. If not now, then when? If not us, then who? Most human endeavors are decidedly anthropocentric. Very few people dedicate much energy to the non-human world, and yet that's the part of the world that gives a richness to our existence. I believe we in this room, we could collectively dedicate energy to the non-human world. I'm inspired by what we can do, especially through electoral politics. It is a critically important campaign year. Let's elect people that believe in wild places and wild things, who will stand with the underdog and not give way. All right? Not give way. My father would be inspired by this too. My father knew of the importance of giving over some of yourself to something bigger than yourself. My father, known as Papa Jack to his grandkids, was a guy's guy. He was a personal defense instructor in the Army, crew cut, square jaw, big forearms, big legs. He was a quintessential baseball coach. I thought the world of my father. He never knew me as a state senator. He died before I was sworn into that chamber, but he cried when I was sworn into the Montana House. Before that, I didn't think my father had that in him. He didn't have that kind of emotion in him, or so I thought. His tears convinced me that he understood the power of public service. I mentioned my father today because about 27 years ago, he came to a talk I gave about the extinction crisis at the Minnesota Zoo in the Twin Cities. I knew he was coming, so I was well prepared. I intended to impress my father, right? I was going to give the talk of my life. And I did okay that night. I gave an okay talk, right? I did okay. And as the evening ends, we're walking out to the car, and my dad hadn't said anything. And if you knew my father, he was never at a loss for words. But he hadn't said anything. I expected at least a modest attaboy, right? Something. Finally, I said, well, gee whiz, Dad, what'd you think? How'd I do? And he said, hesitatingly, he said, well, Mike, you did a nice job, but you need to be more funny. My father thought I needed to be more funny. Well, you know how hard it is to be funny on purpose? Yeah, it's really hard to be funny on purpose, man. Anyway, so tonight, in honor of my father and in honor of the power of laughter, I'm going to close with a joke. Actually, no, two jokes. If one joke is good, two has to be better, right? So, and I don't mean to offend, but have you heard that anti-vaxxers are going to be protected by the Endangered Species Act because their children are threatened? No, come on, man. Give me that one, come on, man. We'll call that one for one. Here we go, 2 for 2. 2 for 2. Why are frogs on the endangered species list? Because they croak a lot. Yeah. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. You get the mic back. Thank you, Mike, very much. If you need to leave. We're going to do 3 questions because we've got reservations and now you guys all have things you got to do. We're going to start right there.
I hear pretty good, and I can repeat the question.
Thank you. My name is Leisha John. I'm with Earthwatch. I want to thank you for your incredible work.
Thank
And
you. Yeah.
You're awesome.
Earthwatch is great.
My question is, what criteria do you use when you decide which species to focus on? Are they all keystones or some other criteria?
No. That's a great question. And we are sort of a single species focused organization. To some extent, we're good with carnivores, and we recognize the ecological importance of predation as a process. And we got excited by pollinators early on. So we focus on carnivores and pollinators, but really we focus on species that had historical ranges that include TED's properties, so they give us a beachhead of opportunity. Now we're not committed to the properties. I showed you that alpha-mile falcon. It failed. Alpha-mile falcons don't understand boundaries. Those birds took off and flew a long ways. And gray wolves go a long ways too. But we like to have our projects connect in some way to Mr. Turner's properties. So that's a real important filter. Thank you for the question. That's a great question. Thank you. Yes.
Here. Mike, I wonder if you have messages that you think really land with people who may not have an inherent value of biodiversity. I think there's a big population of people who are like, okay, wolves, but why? What's in it for me?
No, that's great. And that question relates to an observation I made a long time ago, and it's a sad observation, and it is. We live in a world of ecological illiteracy. People don't have a sense of how Mother Earth operates. They don't know that nutrient cycle and energy flows toward them. And I try to remind them, well, holy mackerel, everything you've known in your life, everything you've known, I promise you, everything you know, I've known, comes from Mother Earth and the sun. It's not real complicated. At the end of the day, it's pretty simple, right? It's pretty simple. And typically that doesn't work. And there's a whole bunch of people that will go through life unaware. And unfortunately, we all suffer the consequences of ignorance. But if enough of us rise up, and it doesn't always have to be a lot of people. I was honored. President Obama invited me to serve with a small group of state legislators to move the needle on clean energy legislation and green jobs. So I went to the White House a lot, and I'm walking about D.C. one day with my fellow legislators and observed, here's why it's so tough. Here's what everything we've known. You look around D.C., this beautiful city, it's all a function of fossil fuels. Everything we've known, fossil fuels have served humanity very well. And now we're saying they can't be the future. That's a hard sell. But the fact is, at that point in time, we only needed to sell about 3 people. You may recall the Waxman-Markey bill that passed the House. Harry Reid was then president of the Senate, had a filibuster-proof majority in the U.S. Senate of Democrats. Unfortunately, Senator Kennedy died. They lost his seat. Lose the filibuster-proof majority. President Obama's got to make a choice. He chose to focus on the Affordable Care Act, Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, a.k.a. Obamacare, rather than the green jobs and clean energy legislation. By the time that health insurance reform had taken place and they got the job done with Obamacare, there simply wasn't enough political capital left in the tank to do anything else. And of course, we all know Obama then was sort of a floating duck for the rest of his term because they lost the House. And so at one point in time, we only needed about 2 or 3 senators. So the masses can be informed, but boy, if our leaders are informed and thoughtful and can look around corners, we can get a lot done. I'm a big believer that campaigns, elections matter. That is the nature of representative democracy. Well, y'all know what we do. We elect somebody. Y'all go do the work. I'm going to go fishing. That's the nature of our form of government. It works really well if the people we send to do the job well. Anyway, good. One more question. You don't have. That's good. No,
Thanks very much, Mike and Chris. Greg Hammer, Citizens Climate Lobby. At CCL, we like to say that we need political will for a livable world, but politicians don't create political will, they respond to it. And so my life work has been, this seems to be dying, maybe it's not.
No, I did.
Par for the course. Anyway, I want to know what kind of, I understand where your energies are devoted, and it's laudable. In fact, I'll be showing my guests from out of town how wolves change rivers. That video on YouTube has got 45 million views, narrated by George Monbiot. It really paints an amazing picture. I urge you all to see it, of how wolves change rivers. But my question to you, Mike, is you're saying this. I spend my life trying to get people to be civically active, to wake up, and at the very minimum to vote, but to be civically active and aware of policy changes, particularly in the area of conservation and climate. And so what do you do in that regard other than what we've heard you say tonight?
Well, yeah. So I served for 14 years. That was partly why. And I'm not in elected office now. I may someday put my name on the ballot again. I beg to differ with you, and I'll make a point. When I got beat in my first campaign, I back in 2004, I got beat. So for about 2 years, I did talk radio. I was the lone progressive voice on AM 1450 KMMS. Mm-hmm. It talks about, man, it's drive time Friday afternoon. We talked about. And on air one day, I was bemoaning the lack of participation in the Bozeman City Commission election. Very, very few people voted. I had an epiphany on. I said, you know what, folks? Stay the hell home. Don't vote. Don't vote. If I'm the only one that votes, there's a punchline here. If I'm the only one that votes, I'm a benevolent dictator. That's a pretty good form of government. The problem is you can't often find benevolent dictators. But my point to the listeners was, I don't want your bullshit vote that's uninformed watering down my informed vote. And I said on air, you people think that voting is the high mark of citizenship. That's bullshit. That's not true. The high mark is casting an informed vote. That's hard to do. It requires a lot. And so challenge people to be informed and ask why. Why is a great question, by the way. And I was asked earlier by somebody, and this works for me. I'm compelled because I don't feel like I got to change your mind. I may ask you why half a dozen times, but at the end of the day, if you still make a boneheaded decision, that's on you, not me.